Hello, I'm Mark Ellen. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of conversations David Hepworth and I have had on this podcast we started 17 years ago. Some with ourselves, others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you enjoy them and want to support us and keep it all coming and get extra entertainment, including the weekly quiz and a special event on your birthday, visit patreon.com/wordinyour-ear or just like or subscribe in whatever way you prefer.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
Well, I ought to explain for the benefit of anybody who doesn't know. I'm David Hepworth, and we thought we'd take the opportunity of Denny being here in the UK around about the launch of this fabulous film, which is on streaming platforms from tomorrow.
Streaming on iTunes and
right
and all Amazon,
go and find
figure
it, watch it again if you're so disposed. We thought an opportunity to just talk to him for about 25 minutes or something like that about this film and the previous film, The Wrecking Crew, which was mentioned earlier, and the whole kind of culture of these very special musicians. And I want to start by saying 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago, I lived just down the road from here in Turnpike Lane, and I used to come up to Crouch End because it had record shops. It had loads of record shops. There was one particular record shop, I don't know if anybody remembers it, in Crouch Hill called Harem Records. Yeah. Okay, people remember it. Well, I used to go there, and I couldn't afford to buy any records, and you couldn't get to hear any records. But you did a very important thing, which nobody does any longer, haven't done for years. And that activity is hugely bound up with the legendary status of these musicians this film is about. You read the sleeve notes of all the records in the shop. And so I was familiar with the words Russ, Kunkel and the difficult to pronounce words Leland Sklar long before I even heard them play. You know, so if you're going to have a name, if you're going to be a musician, be Leland Sklar, you know. It's a good start, isn't it? Now, Denny, obviously, your father was a member of an earlier group of session musicians, the Wrecking Crew, and he didn't get his name on album covers. No. They just accept that, those people.
Yeah, because Dad in 1960, he's 30 years old, so he's kind of like he's been around the block a few times already. And when they broke into the business, they were just happy to be playing music and getting paid. You realize the recording industry is not that old at that point. You know, rock and roll for sure isn't that old. It's only, 5 years old, if you're thinking 1960. Yeah. So they're coming out of the jazz era. But at the time, it was all singles. So you never thought about, getting credits. And then when the LPs started coming around, they didn't want to give you credits because they were doing a lot of stuff they were doing. They were taking bands, they were recording things for bands that should have been getting credits, like the Beach Boys, Pet Sounds, that was the Wrecking Crew, and many other bands they would replace. So it wasn't part of the nature of the business. You didn't want to give credits to those guys.
Right. What was it like growing up the child of a session player in those days? Did you have any idea that it was extraordinary?
No, it was Dad went to work like every other dad. I mean, literally. People always assume it was a hootenanny at my house. I didn't see my dad play guitar. I'm born in 1961, so I didn't see Dad play guitar at home until maybe 1977.
Wow.
Because he was always working, and he didn't have to practice because he played every day for 12, 14 hours a day. So he's not coming home there was no music in the house, except for my older brother who was 10 years older than me.
So what, was there a record player kind of thing?
There was. We had record players, but it was like, you realize you don't want to hear music.
I get all that work.
He wanted to gamble, he wanted to watch TV, he wanted to, play, listen to football, and that was it.
So he didn't ever come home like a cab driver and go, I had the Elvis Presley in my studio.
Yeah,
no.
Nothing impressed him until Frank Sinatra.
Right.
Because again, don't forget, the Beach Boys are not going to impress him at, 1961. They're kids playing.
Right.
He doesn't, and I don't think he appreciated Brian Wilson's work until much later, when they were hearing mixes and stuff.
Right. So, based on your experience with session musicians and the people in this film, the immediate family, if you had to tell us what made a session player a really good session player, what are the qualities?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think reading the room is one. I can go from my father he was a good guitar player, but he was an amazing session player. And he could read music like no one could, but he could also read, he knew what he needed to get to. He knew to get to A to Z. He said, I play for smiles. He goes, I might think that this is a better idea, but that guy's paying the check. You know, he's paying me. So I keep playing until the guy or the girl smiles. And then I know I'm doing the right thing.
Right.
You know, it's really, it's no different than any other job. You got to please.
Yeah.
You know, and you kind of like read the room.
But also presumably be able to perform under pressure.
Oh, my God, yeah. I mean, there's amazing players. I mean, you guys, there's a lot of musicians in this room, and you know them. They're amazing players that can kill it on stage, play live, but they can't necessarily, that red light, as I think Leland says, it goes on. It's a lot of pressure. And I realize the pressure, thinking about my father's career, not so much in the record business, because it's a lot looser in the records. But imagine when you got John Williams and you're the solo guitarist throughout the film, and you've got 80 musicians there, and they're all, you're playing solo and you're open. You're way open. There's no one playing underneath, around you. And you got to know you're in bar 92. That's when you got to come in and take it. That's a lot of pressure. I mean, he blew it the first few times for sure. I mean, everyone does. But he understood and he went back and really worked at it.
So at the time these musicians in the immediate family start coming into prominence, it's the early 70s.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of world. But is it still a kind of 3-hour session and then knock off for lunch or anything like that?
So here's the thing about these guys. When they're coming into this, you realize Russ Kunkel, I mean, other than Russ had the most experience at that time in studios, one of the first 3 albums, you have Sweet Baby James, which is James Taylor, Tapestry, Carole King, and Joni Mitchell's Blue. That's Russ's credits. He could quit then. Yeah. You know, that would have been it. Leland hadn't really done much studio work. He was still in school when they took him on the road. He quit thinking he was going to go back to, college, and he never went back. I'm still trying to get him a degree. And then Danny was still kind of working. But so when they had the chance to go out on the road, they went on the road. They were still kind of the young guys still doing it. I think having the credits on the album and having such success with those 2 albums, Tapestry and Sweet Baby James, those launched those guys' careers. Where it's like, okay, now they're the session guys. I think that's what happens. And again, that changed it for them.
Right. It is extraordinary to reflect on those early James Taylor and the Carole King record, because they're so the songs are so unadorned, aren't they? They're like shaker chairs, aren't they? Those, and yet the tiny bits of refinement that these musicians add. Talk about that. I mean, because that's the stuff that kind of brings it to life, isn't it?
Well, the other thing is, when you asked about earlier about the 3-hour sessions, that's where they're a lot looser now. 1970, 71, they're taking a few weeks. They're actually rehearsing in Peter Asher's apartment. They're really taking their time and rehearsing it and going over and over, what they're going to play in the studio. So when they come in, they're ready. My dad's era, they didn't have that. They went in there, they didn't know what they're looking at. There's the paper, okay, that's it, let's go, boom, 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 boom. And that's how they did it. They never, had music in front of them. And they would go to session. In a lot of ways, the opportunity, I feel the music was much more mature by the time these guys get to it, the immediate family. And at the same time, they're able to create and take their time. And the record companies started trusting. The thing is, record companies didn't trust rock and roll in the early days. In the 60s, they did not trust. That's why it was 3-hour sessions. That's why they had studio musicians, because they're not going to spend a lot of money on a record that might not make any money. Let's get the session guys in there. Let's knock it out. Boom, 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 boom. And we'll put an album out. If it makes it, okay, great. We'll make it, we'll make more. But when they get to the singer-songwriter era, they're taking their time, because they know if they spend more money with James or Carole or Randy Newman or whoever it is, it's going to come back. And so that's why the budgets start going up.
You've got, in your film, I think it starts with James Taylor saying something, and at the end, Jackson Browne says something pretty similar, which is, without these guys, these records would not be half of what they are.
Yeah.
You know. Now, this has never been reflected in payment, has it? In the way, or is it?
Yes and no. I mean, I don't. With these guys, I can for sure I can talk about my father. They were union musicians, so they went in, they got their session fee. If a song goes to, let's say, what do you call it, commercial, or it goes to a movie, they get another session fee. So in other words, over the years, they can make a lot of money. I mean, a great example was when they did Elvis, the comeback special. We made like $10,000 many years later because some casino used that music.
Right.
You know, that's a weird experience, but with the union contracts, they were able to do that. With these guys, they made their money same way. What's that? And touring was much different for them. They did tours where my father didn't do tours.
Yeah, absolutely.
The guys in my dad's era, they didn't do tours because it wasn't worth it. Mm. They're only going to pay $250 maybe a week, and it's going to be miserable. And if they if they leave that seat, there's 8 other guys that are going to jump into that seat. So you don't do that.
One of the things that came out for me seeing the film again is when they talk about they didn't want to be leaders of bands, did they?
Yeah, I think everybody feels that way sometimes. You know, even Carole King didn't want to be a leader. She was really reluctant in her early days. They really pushed her into being an artist, which is really, and even James Taylor. James Taylor didn't want, like they said, you wanted to be James Taylor and the Flying Machine.
Yeah.
There's always, that.
But when they're around the table and they're all talking about, there's it's too much responsibility if you worry about that.
Yeah.
They love the camaraderie.
Absolutely.
Of being with the group, but they don't want to lead the group. You've dealt with them over this film.
Yeah.
Have they got a leader?
There's a lot of opinions.
I'm sure.
The greatest is when you got 3 guitar players. It's hilarious, and you got Leland and Russ going, oh Jesus, they just let them fight it out in the front. Who's what they're gonna do? No, they're all. I mean, I would say Danny's more the leader, and Danny and Waddy. In terms of, because they're the elder guitar players, Steve's going to just sit back. He's the kid that's 66 years old.
So Waddy makes a point in the film of how opinionated he is, doesn't he?
No,
you're playing this wrong. Or, we don't need sax here.
That's interesting. Yes, yes, he does. Yeah, they're great. I think one of the great reviews. I don't know if you guys saw this week, and I think it was in the Guardian. They called. Waddy Wachtel, the Larry David of music.
Yes.
And it was like, oh my God, nailed it.
No, I can see that, definitely.
I mean, Waddy is funny. I mean, he doesn't know he's funny, but it's funny.
Yeah. So how did this project start? I mean, is this something you've been working on for ages?
It came around 2019. Unfortunately, the dedication at the end of the film, Lisa Roy, who was actually the publicist of the band and Danny's partner, she came to the idea. She said, to one of the producers, what do you think of this idea? Because we were working on something that went away. And they said, they presented it to me. I said, that's perfect. I said, I love this idea. They said, it was about the guys that were in the part of the section, which we know the 3 of them. And, they have this band called Immediate Family. I said, that works for me tremendously because I know all the names. You were talking about the names. Leland Sklar was the only one I knew personally, but all the other ones, Cooch, that's a funny name. I always remember it on the album covers. Russ Kunkel sounds like a drum. I always thought there was a nickname, and Waddy Wachtel is Waddy. But so once they started, we went in for a meeting and I said, this is my idea. I want to do this. And they said, great. And they said the next day they called up and said, let's do it. And then they said, Carole King can be interviewed in 3 weeks. And I was like, oh my God, I had 19 years to make the first film, and all of a sudden I got to get it together.
So were you having to zip all over the place, getting Keith Richards and...
Well, so I got Carole. She was in town in 3 weeks. I start doing all my reading, because don't forget, I pitched a kind of a broad stroke on this. I'm going off of the Wrecking Crew on what I'm going to think about, and did Carole, did Linda, did James, did Jackson, did Phil, I can't remember who else, so Lou Adler and a few others, all before like Christmas in January, and then COVID hits. Now everything like, oh my God, now I got a band of 70-year-olds and the world's ending, and I got no film.
Surely you didn't entertain that ungenerous thought.
No, not at all. And it was like, I was like, all right, so here we go. And then we slowly went out to each of the guys' places. And we, in a weird way, it was kind of good that it went that way, because there was a lot of trust at this point. There was a lot of trust. The good thing for me is there was a lot of trust for me coming into this project of my dad's reputation. They knew of my dad if they didn't work with my dad. So that was, and they loved the first film. So they knew they would be safe. I'm not looking for shit. I'm not looking for dirt. I'm not looking for anything, I'm not that filmmaker. And so I respect musicians more than anything. I love all the musicians. And so we took care of each other, and we just kept going and going out and getting more and more. And we just kept building. There's a few Zoom interviews, like Keith Richards is one. Neil Young, which is one of my favorites because...
It looks like a Zoom interview.
It is so Zoom. And I begged for Daryl Hannah. I said to him, please, someone ask her to shoot the thing so we don't have to do Zoom. But whatever. It's Neil Young. And someone said, I think an audience member said, it looks like a crazy weatherman, walking around in his living room. But it's Neil Young. And it's like, okay, and Stevie Nicks. But, what I learned in the first film, it's not always the look, it's always the message. I could have a black screen. If I heard the voice, that's it. If it says something that's meaningful, it's worth getting.
How do you go about getting all the clearances for a film like this?
Well, clearances, we hired a supervisor, but, we start early. So this is what we're doing. And luckily, listen, we have Carole, James, Jackson. Those three, there's a lot of pull. They're not going to turn anything down. So even though they have right to turn things down, they're not going to, and they're going to make sure that the labels don't mess with us. Everybody's on Most Favored Nations. We were talking about it earlier. On these films, you got to have Most Favored Nations where everybody's getting the same across the board, because I can't go 10 seconds here, you're going to get this, it'll get crazy. And you need to know ahead of time what our budget is, or listen, this one label could blow it for us. And that scares you after you finish the project. Go, oh my God, what if Warner Brothers said no?
Right.
I have 30 songs with Warner Brothers. I'm done.
And you can't recut the film.
No, you can't do it. And it's a dangerous, we only had one, one publisher that was not a nice person.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I'll just give you the song. You can look it up. Yeah. No, it was kind of a bummer because it was just one song, and they didn't want to help us. I don't mean free, by the way, guys. I'm talking about everybody's getting the same. And it was like, no, they wanted $3,000 more for Hurt So Bad. I said, and they didn't have a majority of the song. They only had 30% of the song. And it's like, wait a minute, I can't do $3,000 more because that's times 80. 5 songs, you figure it out. We don't have the money. That's $250,000. Nope, take it out.
So, are there people still working like this?
Yeah.
Really?
There's a few people. You still got, it's funny because there's like Dean Parks, you see his name up in some of those things. He's still working. Guys are still working. Lee's still working. They get the calls still, but it's not like it used to be. It's never going to be, and it's not because technology has changed. The business is always changing, developing. It's just a new way of making music. In my dad's day, they had to be in the studio because there was no choices. You had to be all together. You only had one track when it was mono. So everybody in the room could not make a mistake. So it was even harder. You had 3 hours not to make a mistake, and you could only make 3 songs. That's what you were allowed to. So the development later of having all those tracks allowed them to be freer and more, I think creative.
Right.
And now anybody can make a track.
What's your personal favorite of all the tracks that are represented on that?
Wow.
What's the one
it's
that
funny
makes...
you say. It's weird because I got to a lot of this. Some of this music, even though I grew up with it, there was a lot of music, and my wife will tell you, I'm not a big fan of. I'm not going to say which one it is, but she would marry the person. But no, Leo Sarah. One of the songs is funny because I wasn't a big Andrew Gold song, that Lonely Boy song, right, when I was growing up. And then I got all these albums, I had to buy them, and I'm listening to them, putting them on the turntable. And Lonely Boy, and I'm hearing Waddy's solo going, whoa. I got goosebumps underneath my jacket right now because I really hear these songs differently now. Yeah. And I got to hear, and don't forget, is when we had albums, track 8 on the B side. Whoa, what is that? And you forget, and so I had to listen to all that. So I got to be a big fan of a lot of things. So like that one, every time I hear it, I go, look, he's killing it on that.
Yeah. There's also additional material on your website, isn't there? I was looking at something earlier today. I think it's Jason Brown talking about how Doctor My Eyes was done. And it's really interesting.
It really is.
It's only when it's got a rhythm section you think, oh my God, it's the Beatles. You know what I mean?
Right.
And you think, without that, there's no Jackson 5 cover of Doctor My Eyes.
Right.
It just doesn't happen at all, It's that animation that comes in with these musicians.
I think I think playing together is what it is. I mean, music was meant to be played together.
Yeah.
So everybody, just raise your hand if you're a musician. Okay. Raise your hand if you're not. Good. But you know what I mean? The musicians, they want to be together. And you're not always able to do it now. And you can't influence each other like the old days. You've been in the room, you're tracking, you hear the bass and the drums, they start going this way and they push each other and mistakes happen, which are great.
But that's interesting, isn't it? There's quite sentimental at the end, isn't it? When they're a bunch of guys in their 70s.
Yeah.
They're still there.
Yeah.
And they're still playing with the guys that they played with when they were 23.
Yeah.
Which is pretty extraordinary.
It's really extraordinary. I mean, the fact that Leland and Russ are with Lyle Lovett right now, and they were just in London for those, I think a few saw a couple last month. They're still on the road, with him. And Waddy Wachtel's a musical director for Stevie Nicks still after all those years. And they, the reason this band came together was just out of friendship. And the proudest moment I think about these guys is when COVID hit, they could have walked away. They could have walked away from this film. There's no reason for them to, there's nothing, or they could have walked away from the band. It wasn't like the band was so, it's so easy to walk away at this age in our lives, do things that you want to do and just hang and be with your family.
Shall I tell you, I disagree.
Yeah.
Because they're all thinking, and they won't say this to you, my grandchildren will see this and see what I did.
I know, you're right. And that's exactly.
It's a really important thing.
And I think that's why the film kept the band together in a sense to continue. But during COVID, what they did is on Fridays, they would have this meeting over Zoom. They would trade music and they would talk about things. And this went on for obviously a year and a half, 2 years, whatever it was, until we got together. And they would come out with videos. They would film themselves at home and they would send in the material and they did a whole album without being in the room together. But that's not unusual. But doing the videos was pretty amazing. So they encouraged each other. And where you could have taken the easy way out, it's not like they're making money off the immediate family.
So as you can tell, work of international importance. And, we've been privileged to hear from him. Please put your hands together. Denny Tedesco.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.